I would like to thank all of the organizers. I would not take too much of your time, 10 minutes exact. I would also like to apologize because I'm a little bit sick right now, so my voice sounds like this. Um, so this is my presentation, and I would directly get into the topic. As Anna said, my research is on consumer harm, but today's presentation is on transparency. The reason I chose this topic or this heading is as a writer, I was very inspired by this movie. And for those of you who haven't seen the movie, spoiler alert, it's about a group of magicians who trick and steal a lot of money, and they perform magic tricks, and then they rob a bank and they get a lot of money. So drawing that analogy onto the bank, onto the platforms where is it truly transparent? And though platforms and service providers on platforms say that they are transparent, are they actually transparent? And what is the effect of this transparency or lack thereof? So that is my paper. And it's a transparency on platforms is a very complex subject, and I would not go into explaining what platforms are to this audience who has clearly more experience than me on that subject. So I will give a very brief introduction of transparency, as all of you know, and has been presented through the last 3 days. Is where one person, or in this situation the seller or the service provider, has more information than the other on specifically on platforms. And for regulations or for legislations, transparency is not a new concept or a new idea. It has always existed in the EU and in India, and my paper would be a comparative analysis, both in the EU and in India. And the application of this transparency on platforms refers to the tripartite system of platforms, consumers, and the service providers. I would deal with the transparency towards the consumer. That is, what transparency must be provided by the platform and the service provider towards the consumer. And in very brief, how can this transparency be provided, or how does this transparency exist? This transparency can exist through self-declaration of where the consumer or the service provider declares that he or she is transparent. Algorithmic transparency is a very new initiative where platforms are providing algorithmic transparency as to what the main parameters of their ranking system are being disclosed. This is a very tiny part of their algorithm. We understand that they cannot disclose all the information because this is a trade secret. Disclosures refers to the disclosures that are made by the platform or by the service providers as to their nature. And awareness is by themselves, where consumers, service providers, all the platforms can be self-aware of their interactions and of their positions. I'm going quite quickly to reach the crux of my topic, which are the issues. So therefore, the importance of transparency is not under question. Everyone understands that transparency is important. Trust is based on this transparency, and in a situation, especially on platforms where you don't physically meet the other party, this transparency and this trust is more important. I will now move on to the issues that I raise in my paper, which I will spend a little more time on. So the first issue that I raise is information asymmetry. As explained very well this morning and through the last 3 days, information asymmetry and is where one party has more information than the other, and no information asymmetry research can go without the 1970 Lemons problem, where they use the example of resale of cars, which is the second-hand cars, to explain where one party has more information than the other. Using the Lemons problem, we can apply this onto platforms where the service provider or the seller has more information. For that, the EU and in India, under the Consumer Rights Directive, Chapter 3, Article 6, and in India in the most recent Consumer Protection Act of 2019, provides that consumers have the right to information, and they have tried to provide them with more information, which is a very good step. However, the platform economy is so unique that it creates one more problem of information asymmetry, where the information is generated by other consumers or consumers themselves. This is in the form of ratings and reviews on platforms. These are provided by previous consumers who have used the service, who have used the goods, and leave these reviews. The fake reviews that exist on these platforms contribute to exacerbate the information asymmetry problem, because as all of us do, we do read the reviews and ratings and see the ratings and the rankings before we purchase any product. And any fake review or incorrect review or a non-genuine review on these will exacerbate this issue. I provided more examples in my paper, but we will skip all of that for now. The second issue that I raise is the role of the platform. As I discussed, that this paper is transparency towards the consumer, and in this tripartite system, one of the other parties that has to provide this transparency is the platform. The fairness and the transparency regulation happens to be the regulation that provides transparency directly. However, it is important to remember that this is transparency between the platform and the service provider and not the consumer. However, the Modernization Directive has taken this and amended the UCPD in Article 4A to include the fact that if transparency and fairness is not provided to the consumer, it would be an unfair commercial practice. Furthermore, the DSA in its draft Article 29 provides that large gatekeepers or larger online platforms must provide the information in a transparent manner, especially in relation to recommender systems. The DSA is only in its first step, and similarly in India we have the first step of data protection and platform protection. This is seen in the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is also at its bill stage, and the draft National E-commerce Policy, which is at its policy stage. So it's in its very nascent stages, but they too emphasize the importance of transparency towards the consumer, especially from the platform. And going back to the Uber and Airbnb cases, and if a platform is indeed considered as an information society service, as explained in those two cases, the ISS directive also provides the importance of transparency. I would skip to the role of service provider, which is the other party which has to provide or which must be transparent towards the consumer. Again, so the Modernization Directive amending the UCPD provides this transparency initiative. In India, there is the most recent the Consumer Protection E-commerce Rules of 2020, which provides specific duties. It says sellers' duties at e-commerce marketplace or platform duties, and which is very specific, which provides the duties and the liabilities, and especially the role of the service provider. As discussed in the morning, if there was supposed to be a consultation on the position of workers on the platforms, and if that does go through, the position of these service providers, the position of these workers, whatever the position is clarified, the role of the service provider would indeed be to provide more transparency towards the consumer, because at the end of the day, it's their reputation on the line. There are examples of Uber and Airbnb providing more transparency, especially in relation to what information they collect from the consumer. And at Airbnb, most recently, they're providing transparent information of their pricing strategy. The last part, after highlighting all of these issues, is not to say that transparency does not exist, but how can we, at what level should this be, and if we can enforce it and make it better. So at what level? Going through the presentation, it must be at all three levels, from the pre-contractual stage and even after the transaction is completed. From the service provider and the platform, it must be there. Consumers themselves can be aware, can enhance their own transparency. And monitoring, when there is a tripartite complex system of the platform, the service provider, and the consumer, it's easier to enforce transparency amongst themselves rather than have a government or an institution or an external body enforcing this transparency. But if it does come to that, then this transparency can be enforced externally as well. I would just like to conclude in the last 1 minute by saying that transparency is a veil, and the lesser that this veil exists, and if this veil is truly transparent, and we can lift this veil between the consumer and the service provider, it would enhance the transparency in this entire system. And going back to my analogy, at the end of the movie, if they do run away with the money, and people are surprised by this magic show, but they are at a loss because they do lose a lot of money. And if we don't enhance transparency, and if we don't focus on the importance of transparency, both the economy and we will suffer, and we would lose a lot of money. So thank you for this opportunity again. I am 1 minute over time, but thank you once again.